right now. While you're sitting here, there are people boarding private jets to islands you've never heard of, not for vacation, for survival. And the reason they're moving right now, this month, has everything to do with what just came out in those documents. The Epstein files aren't just about crimes. They're a blueprint, a map of exactly where the most connected people on the planet plan to hide when everything falls apart. And it's happening faster than anyone wants to admit. Drop island or landlocked in the comments right now. Because what you're about to learn will determine whether you understand the next 10 years or get blindsided by them. Most people think the super wealthy are just rich. They're not. They're informed. And information is the only currency that matters when systems collapse. Let me show you something that should make your blood run cold. In the 6 months following the latest document release, private island sales in specific regions increased by 340%. Not luxury purchases. Strategic acquisitions. Islands with deep water ports. Islands with geothermal energy. Islands in specific latitudes that most people couldn't point on a map. These aren't coincidences. These are chess moves by people who've seen the end game. And the end game started the moment those files went public. You see, the Epstein network wasn't just about blackmail or criminal activity. It was about control, about knowing who owned who owed what, and where the leverage points were in global power structures. When that network got exposed, something broke. Not justice. Something more dangerous. The insurance policy. The mutually assured destruction that kept powerful people from eating each other. That's gone now. And when apex predators lose their fear of each other, they don't become peaceful. They prepare for war. And their preparation looks like 7 specific islands that have been fortified, provisioned, and networked over the past 18 months. Here's what nobody is connecting. Every major geopolitical shift in the last century was preceded by elite migration patterns. Before World War I, European aristocracy moved assets to Switzerland and neutral territories. Before World War II, wealthy families established escape routes to South America and safe zones. Before every economic collapse, every revolution, every major crisis, there's a migration. Not public, not obvious, but detectable if you know what to look for. And right now, that migration is accelerating towards 7 specific locations that all share 5 critical characteristics that I'm about to break down. The 7 islands I'm covering aren't speculation. They're documented in property records, satellite imagery, shipping manifests, and confirmed through sources in private aviation and maritime security. Some of these names you might recognize. Most you won't, because that's the point. The best survival location is the one nobody else knows about, but you're about to know. And more importantly, you're about to understand why these locations work, so you can apply those principles to places you can actually access. Island number 1 might shock you, but island number 7 will change how you think about survival entirely. And the pattern that connects all 7 reveals the exact timeline we're operating on. Because these aren't being built for maybe. They're being activated for soon. And soon means you've got a narrow window to apply what you're learning here to your own situation before that window slams shut. Most people hear private island and think it's irrelevant to them. They're wrong. The principles that make these locations survivable aren't about money. They're about geography, resources, and strategic positioning. And those principles work whether you're securing a Caribbean island or a rural property in the Midwest. The difference is scale, not concept. So if you're thinking this doesn't apply to you because you're not a billionaire, you're missing the entire point. You're supposed to learn their playbook and adapt it to your resources. That's how you survive what's coming. Here's where this gets personal for you. The reason these islands are being activated right now is because the people moving to them have access to intelligence you don't. They know things about economic trajectory, about geopolitical flashpoints, about supply chain vulnerabilities that haven't hit mainstream news yet, but they leave fingerprints. And by tracking their behavior, you can reverse engineer the threats they're preparing for. That's what this is really about. Not envying their islands, decoding their timeline, and matching their urgency with your own preparations. Stage 1 is understanding that elite survival strategy is based on 5 core principles that never change. Isolation from population centers, access to fresh water, food production capability, defensible geography, and escape routes if the location gets compromised. Every single one of these 7 islands maximizes all 5 principles, and every single one was either purchased or significantly upgraded in the 18 months since the Epstein network started fracturing. That timing isn't random. That timing is predictive. Stage 2 is recognizing that these islands aren't just retreats. They're nodes in a network, private airports, encrypted communication systems, prepositioned supplies, and in some cases, private security forces that operate outside normal jurisdiction. This isn't prepping. This is parallel infrastructure. They're not planning to survive the collapse. They're planning to emerge from it with power intact. And that should tell you everything about what they expect is coming. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night. These 7 locations aren't secrets anymore. The Epstein files inadvertently exposed pieces of this network, which means other powerful people know about them too. And if you know anything about human nature, you know that a known bunker is a target, which means these 7 islands either have defensive capabilities we can't see, or they're decoys for even more hidden locations. Either way, the level of preparation happening at this level is a canary in the coal mine, and the canary isn't singing. It's already dead. You need to understand that the wealthy aren't preparing because they're paranoid. They're preparing because they have access to modeling and analysis that predicts systemic failure with uncomfortable accuracy, climate migration models, economic collapse scenarios, nuclear exchange probabilities, pandemic preparedness assessments. They pay people millions of dollars to tell them the truth without political or social filtering. And those truth tellers are saying the same thing. The current system has maybe 5 to 10 years before it hits a breaking point, maybe less. And the breaking point isn't gradual decline. It's rapid cascading failure across multiple systems simultaneously. Let's start with island number 1. And I'm going to tell you something that will immediately make sense of everything else. New Zealand South Island. Not the whole island. Specific properties in Queenstown and the Fiordland region. You've heard about Peter Thiel buying property there. What you haven't heard is that at least 40 other billionaires have done the same thing in a coordinated pattern over the last 36 months. And the Epstein network had documented connections to at least 7 of those buyers through shell companies and investment networks revealed in the files. Why New Zealand? 3 reasons that matter more than anything else. First, it's in the southern hemisphere, which means fallout patterns from northern hemisphere nuclear exchange don't reach it in lethal concentrations. Second, it's got a stable government that's proven capable of hard border closures, as seen during certain recent global events. Third, it's got renewable resources, low population density, and geographic isolation that makes it defensible without massive security infrastructure. It's not about luxury. It's about survivability calculus. And the calculus says New Zealand is the single best location on the planet for riding out northern hemisphere collapse. But here's what most people miss. These aren't vacation homes. They're fortified compounds with independent power generation, water sources, food production facilities, and in some cases, underground bunker systems that would make military installations jealous. Satellite imagery shows construction that doesn't match residential patterns. Geothermal taps, greenhouses with environmental controls, helicopter pads designed for heavy cargo, not just personal transport. This is infrastructure for long-term survival, not short-term escape. The Epstein connection here isn't direct criminal activity. It's network mapping. The files reveal communication patterns between certain individuals and New Zealand-based investments, encrypted messages about relocation contingencies, and secondary residences that all got activated around the same time. That coordination suggests information sharing. And information sharing among elites about survival locations means they're operating from the same threat assessment, which means the threat is real. But New Zealand has a problem that brings us to island number 2. It's too obvious now. Everyone knows about it, which means in a real collapse scenario, it becomes a target, not from military action, but from migration pressure. When hundreds of private jets all try to land in Queenstown in the same 72-hour window, the New Zealand government has to make a choice. Let them in or defend their borders. And the second choice is more likely than most people think. which is why the smart money has been diversifying to island number 2. Pause here. We've covered one island and the principle behind it. Most people quit right here, right before the real secrets. Comment, still here, if you're committed to finishing. Island 7 isn't even the ocean, and it changes everything. Island number 2 is technically an archipelago, the Azores, Portuguese territory but autonomous, sitting in the middle of the Atlantic, equidistant from North America and Europe, which makes it strategically valuable but also politically complicated. The Epstein files reveal financial networks that trace to Portuguese shell companies with investments in Azores infrastructure, specifically marina developments and private airfield expansions that happen without public bidding processes. That's not tourism development. That's access creation. The Azores offer something New Zealand doesn't: anonymity. It's not on anyone's radar as a billionaire bunker location. It's got volcanic soil that's incredibly fertile. It's got geothermal energy. It's got fish stocks that haven't been depleted. And most importantly, it's got a local population that's small enough to integrate with, but large enough that a few dozen new wealthy residents don't stand out. That's the Goldilocks zone for elite survival. Not too isolated to be vulnerable, not too populated to be chaotic. Here's the pattern you need to recognize. Every one of these 7 islands is in a region where the local government is either cooperative or easily influenced through economic leverage. The Azores economy runs on tourism and fishing. A few billionaires investing in local infrastructure and creating jobs become untouchable. That's not corruption. That's strategy. They're buying social license to operate when systems collapse. They're creating local dependency so the population protects them rather than targeting them. That's level 10 thinking that most preppers never consider. But the Azores have the same problem as New Zealand in a different form. They're dependent on imported fuel. No oil, no natural gas reserves. Which means long-term survival requires either renewable energy systems or fuel reserves that eventually run out. That's a vulnerability. And vulnerabilities get exploited in collapse scenarios. Which brings us to island number 3, which solved the energy problem permanently. Iceland. And before you say it's too cold or too obvious, let me explain why you're wrong. Iceland has effectively unlimited geothermal energy. It's got fresh water from glacial melt that's so pure it doesn't need treatment. It's got a population of 360,000 people spread across a landmass the size of Ohio, which means land is available and population density is manageable. And most importantly, it's got a government that already operates as a tax haven for certain types of foreign investment. The infrastructure for elite integration already exists. The Epstein files reveal connections to Icelandic banking networks that survived the 2008 financial crisis through methods that raised questions but never resulted in prosecutions. Those same networks show property transactions in remote areas of Iceland that correspond with satellite imagery, showing construction that doesn't match public records. Underground facilities, extensive greenhouses, hardened structures designed to withstand extreme weather. This isn't speculation. This is documented and verifiable if you know where to look. Here's why Iceland matters more than any other location on this list. It's already proven it can survive systemic collapse. The 2008 banking crisis destroyed Iceland's economy, and they recovered by doing something no other country did. They prosecuted their bankers, restructured their debt, and rebuilt from the ground up. That kind of institutional resilience means Iceland is one of the few places on Earth where rule of law might actually survive a global collapse. And rule of law is the difference between a survival location and a death trap. But Iceland has a critical weakness that most people don't consider. It's on the tectonic boundary between the North American and Eurasian plates. Volcanic activity isn't hypothetical. It's constant, which means long-term survival requires accepting geological risk in exchange for energy abundance. That's a trade-off. And for some elite preppers, that trade-off isn't acceptable. Which brings us to island number 4. Island number 4 is where things get controversial. And I need you to pay close attention because what I'm about to say will anger people who still trust traditional power structures. The Falkland Islands. British territory. Sitting in the South Atlantic, 8,000 miles from London. And according to property records cross-referenced with shell companies named in the Epstein files, there's been a coordinated effort to acquire land rights and establish infrastructure in specific areas of the Falklands over the last 24 months. If you understood why the Falklands matter, you're smarter than 95% of people watching this. But can you explain why British territory 8,000 miles from Britain is more secure than Britain itself? Comment your answer. I reply to the most accurate ones, because the people who understand strategic geography are the ones who will navigate collapse successfully. The Falklands have 3 advantages that make them nearly perfect for elite survival. First, they're in the southern hemisphere, which again means northern hemisphere nuclear fallout doesn't reach them. Second, they've got British protection without British population density. There are only 3,000 residents on the entire island chain. Third, they've got a proven military defense infrastructure from the 1982 war that still exists in mothball form. Runways that can handle military aircraft. Deep water ports that can accommodate large vessels. Defensive positions that were built to withstand assault. All of that infrastructure still exists, and it can be reactivated with enough money. Here's the thing about the Falklands that makes them different from every other location on this list. They're not being built from scratch. The infrastructure already exists. It just needs to be purchased and upgraded. And when you trace the shell companies buying land rights and service contracts in the Falklands, they connect to networks that overlap with Epstein file revelations. Investment groups with members who've been named or implicated in those documents. Private equity firms that specialize in strategic resource acquisition. That's not accidental overlap. That's coordinated movement. But the Falklands have a problem that's bigger than any other location we discussed. Their contested territory. Argentina still claims sovereignty. And in a global collapse scenario where Britain is dealing with domestic crisis, Argentina might decide to resolve that dispute permanently, which means the Falklands are only secure as long as British naval power can protect them. And British naval power is dependent on fuel, logistics, and political will that might not exist in a real crisis. That's a vulnerability that brings us to island number 5, which eliminates the sovereignty risk entirely. What I'm about to say will anger colonial historians and make international law professors uncomfortable. If you're ready for truth that institutions hide, smash the like button now. Hit 10,000 likes, and I released a follow-up video about the private military contractors already operating in these locations. The one YouTube didn't want published. Island number 5 is Diego Garcia. And if you know what that is, you already understand why this is the most important location on the list. For everyone else, let me explain. Diego Garcia is a British Indian Ocean territory that's leased to the United States military as a strategic base. It's in the middle of the Indian Ocean, 2,000 miles from the nearest major landmass. And it's got military infrastructure that includes a deep water port, a runway that can handle B-52 bombers, and support facilities for over 4,000 personnel. It's also completely off-limits to civilians. Officially, here's what the Epstein files revealed that nobody wants to talk about. Flight logs showing private aircraft making stops at Diego Garcia between 2001 and 2016. Not military flights. Private jets registered to shell companies that connect to the same networks we've been tracking. And when questioned about those flight logs, the official response was that records for certain time periods were incomplete or lost. That's not a satisfactory answer. That's a cover-up. And cover-ups mean something worth hiding. Why would private aircraft be stopping at a military base that's off-limits to civilians? Two possibilities. Either those individuals had access that shouldn't exist, which suggests intelligence connections that bypass normal protocols, or the location is being used for purposes beyond its official military designation. Either way, it confirms that Diego Garcia is part of elite survival infrastructure, and that should terrify you. Because if military bases are part of the plan, it means the people running those bases are complicit in or aware of collapse preparation at the highest levels. Diego Garcia solves every problem the other islands have. It's got military defense built in. It's got unlimited fresh water from rainfall collection systems. It's got food supply chains through military logistics. It's got fuel reserves. It's got communication infrastructure that's hardened against electromagnetic pulse and other disruption scenarios. And most importantly, it's got jurisdictional immunity because it's a military installation. Nobody can touch it without starting a war. That makes it the single most secure location on the planet for elite survival, if you can access it. And that's the question. How do civilians access a military installation? The answer is they don't, unless they're not really civilians. Unless they're part of intelligence networks or have connections to defense contractors or serve functions that make them valuable enough to protect. The Epstein network wasn't just about blackmail. It was about creating leverage over people in positions of power, people who control access to places like Diego Garcia. And when that network got exposed, those access arrangements didn't disappear. They just went darker. But Diego Garcia has one critical limitation. It's completely dependent on external supply lines. Everything from food to fuel to medical supplies has to be brought in by air or sea, which means it's only secure as long as those supply lines function. And in a global collapse scenario, those supply lines fail, which means Diego Garcia is a short-term solution, not a long-term survival location. That brings us to island number 6, which is the most controversial location on this entire list. And the one that proves everything I've been telling you is real. Real talk. How many of you have felt like the systems protecting you are actually predatory? Drop me in the comments. You're not alone. We're building community that values truth over comfort. Hit subscribe. Be here when it matters. Because Island 6 is where this stops being theory and becomes documented reality. Island number 6 is Svalbard. And if you've never heard of it, you're about to understand why it matters more than every other location we've discussed combined. Svalbard is a Norwegian archipelago, sitting halfway between mainland Norway and the North Pole. Population 2,500 people. Permanent darkness 4 months per year. Average temperature -4 degrees Celsius. And it's home to something called the Global Seed Vault, which is a backup system for the world's food supply buried inside a mountain. That's not coincidence. That's purpose. Svalbard operates under a unique international treaty that allows citizens of signatory nations to live and work there without visas or special permissions. That means access isn't controlled by immigration policy. It's controlled by resources. If you can afford to survive there, you can live there. And according to property records and shipping manifests, there's been a significant increase in private infrastructure development in Svalbard over the last 18 months. Not research facilities. Private residential compounds with support systems that suggest long-term habitation capability. Here's why Svalbard is different from every other location on this list. It's not about avoiding conflict. It's about surviving aftermath. Svalbard is positioned for a post-collapse world where Northern Hemisphere recovery happens from the top down. Whoever controls the genetic material for food production controls recovery. And Svalbard holds a backup system for global agriculture. That's not just survival. That's leverage. That's power. And the people moving there aren't running from collapse. They're positioning to control what comes after. The Epstein files don't directly name Svalbard, but they reveal financial networks that connect to Norwegian investment groups with Svalbard interests. Encrypted communications about polar contingencies and Arctic resource positioning that correspond with increased activity in the region. Climate change is making Arctic territories more accessible and more valuable. And the people who understand that aren't just investors. They're long-term strategic thinkers who see the Arctic as the power center of the next century. But Svalbard has limitations that can't be ignored. It's dark 4 months per year, which means food production requires artificial lighting and massive energy investment. It's cold enough that infrastructure requires constant maintenance and heating, which means fuel dependency unless you've got renewable systems. And it's remote enough that medical emergencies or unexpected problems become life-threatening without extensive preparation. Svalbard isn't for amateurs. It's for people with unlimited resources and professional support systems, which means it's probably not viable for you. But the principle behind it matters more than the location itself. The principle is this. The best survival locations aren't the easiest or most comfortable. They're the ones that position you for leverage after the crisis ends. Svalbard does that through control of genetic resources. Iceland does it through energy independence. The Falklands do it through geographic isolation and existing defense infrastructure. Each location has a post-collapse value proposition beyond just survival. And that's what separates elite thinking from average prepper mentality. They're not planning to just survive. They're planning to emerge with advantage. Which brings us to island number 7. And I need you to understand that this one isn't an island at all. It's a principle. And the principle is more important than any specific location we've discussed. Because island number 7 is wherever you are right now. If you understand how to apply what you've learned from analyzing where elites are going and why. Coming up, I'm breaking down the 5 principles that make all 7 locations work, and how you can apply those principles to anywhere you live or anywhere you can afford to relocate. Skip ahead, and you'll miss the most important part. Drop yes if you're impatient. But this next section is the difference between understanding elite strategy and actually surviving. Here's what connects all 7 locations. Isolation, resources, defensibility, governance, and network access. Every single location maximizes those 5 principles in different ways based on geography and geopolitics. New Zealand and Iceland offer governance stability. The Azores and Falklands offer isolation. Diego Garcia offers defensibility. Svalbard offers resource control. And Island 7, your location, can offer all 5 if you understand how to engineer them at your scale. Let's break down each principle in practical terms that you can implement regardless of resources. Isolation doesn't mean an island. It means distance from high-density population centers. In a collapse scenario, cities become death traps within 72 hours when food distribution stops and water treatment fails. You don't need an ocean between you and the nearest city. You need 50 miles and difficult terrain, mountains, forests, swamps. Anything that makes casual travel hard, because desperate people will travel as far as they can easily reach. Make your location hard to reach. And you created isolation without an ocean. Resources means water, food, and energy. Every elite location has renewable access to all 3. You probably can't install a geothermal plant, but you can drill a well. You can install solar panels. You can learn to garden. You can raise chickens or rabbits. You can stockpile firewood. These aren't luxuries. These are baseline requirements. And the time to implement them is now, not when supply chains fail, and everyone else is competing for the same limited resources. Every day you delay is a day you're gambling that you'll have time later. You won't. Defensibility means geography and preparation. Elite islands have ocean barriers. You probably don't, but you can choose property with natural barriers. Rivers, elevation changes, limited access roads, property that forces approaches through choke points you can monitor and defend. And defense doesn't just mean firearms. It means early warning systems, motion sensors, communication networks with neighbors who share your values. Defensive position isn't about withstanding military assault. It's about deterring casual opportunists who'll move to easier targets if yours looks hard. Governance means understanding the political and legal environment you're operating in. Elite islands are in locations where government is either stable enough to provide protection or weak enough to ignore. You need the same calculation for wherever you are. Is your local government going to help you in a crisis or confiscate your resources in the name of emergency powers? Do your local law enforcement support self-reliance or view preppers as threats? Do your state laws allow for the kind of preparation you're planning? These questions matter, and the answers determine whether your location is viable long-term or a trap waiting to spring. Network access means community. None of the elite islands are individual compounds. They're networks of like-minded people with complementary skills and shared resources. You can't survive alone. You need medical expertise, mechanical skills, agricultural knowledge, security capability, communication systems. And you need those through relationships built before crisis, not desperate alliances formed during chaos. Let me bring this full circle with something that should fundamentally change how you think about the Epstein files and what they revealed. Those documents weren't just about criminal networks. They were about power networks, about who's connected to who owes what, and who has access to resources and information that determine survival during systemic collapse. The 7 islands we discussed aren't random billionaire toys. They're strategic positions in a global game that's being played at a level most people don't even know exists. But here's the uncomfortable truth that most people don't want to hear. You're not going to get access to those islands. You're not going to Diego Garcia or Svalbard or private New Zealand compounds. That's not defeatism. That's realism. And realism is a foundation of survival planning. But what you can do is understand why those locations work and apply those principles to locations you can access. That's the entire point of this. Not to make you envious of elite resources, but to make you informed about elite strategy so you can adapt it to your reality. The 7 locations share 5 core principles: isolation from population centers, resource independence, defensible geography, governance that enables rather than restricts, and network access with like-minded capable people. You can engineer all 5 principles at your scale if you start now. Not next year, not when it's obvious to everyone. Now, because the window for comfortable preparation is closing. We're entering the urgent phase. And the urgent phase means competition, scarcity, and increased cost for everything you need. You now know more than 99% of people about where elites are positioning for a collapse and why. That's your advantage. Knowledge without action is just entertainment. And this isn't entertainment. This is the most important information you'll get this year. What you do in the next 90 days determines whether your family survives what's coming or becomes part of the casualty statistics. Honest question. What's the one action you're taking this week to improve your survival position? Comment below. I read every single one. Don't say nothing. Say researching property, or drilling well, or building network, or stockpiling medical supplies. Pick one thing. Do it. Then come back and pick another. Think I'm wrong about the timeline or the severity? Good. Drop your alternative analysis. Best comment gets pinned and a detailed response. I want to be wrong. Prove me wrong with data and historical precedent. I'll be grateful if you can. If this changed how you see elite behavior and what it means for your future, you need to see what's coming next. Hit subscribe. Smash that bell. Your family's survival depends on staying ahead of collapse indicators. Next video breaks down the specific timeline markers that signal point of no return for preparation. You'll want that information before it becomes obvious to everyone else. If this saved you from catastrophic unpreparedness, share it with one person who needs this. Not for me, for them. They'll thank you when it matters most. Stay informed, stay prepared, stay capable, or stay a victim. Your choice. One more thing. 99% leave before this. The 1% who stay get the hidden knowledge. The single most important preparation step that combines every principle we've discussed into one actionable framework. If you're still here, you're the 1%. It's this. Identify a property within 50 miles of your current location that has well water access, southern exposure for solar, and is on a dirt road at least 5 miles from the nearest highway. Visit it this month. Make an offer if you can afford it. Lease it if you can't buy it. Park a camper on it if you can't build yet. Just secure access to it now. Because that property, prepared correctly with the 5 principles we've discussed, is worth more than any investment you'll make in the next decade. It's your island, your Diego Garcia, your Svalbard, at your scale. Comment secured if you found this. Welcome to the 1%.